All right, so in this video, I'm gonna show you guys how I filled these tile miters with two-part color matched epoxy. This epoxy is from a company called Lamlock, Lamlock. They make a great product. It comes with these little vials of color, I don't know, paint or whatever it is, coloring that you can mix with the epoxy to really dial in your match. So I mix it directly on the face of a scrap piece of tile. That way you visually can just be looking at it. You can verify that your color's right. This epoxy was a 25-minute epoxy, so it gives you a pretty good working time. If you had one that was more than that, that maybe could work a little bit better for you, but I felt like 25 minutes was just about perfect. By the time you mix it up, you got a few minutes there, and you spread it on the wall. It works out real well. About an hour to an hour and a half after the first coat, it's hard enough that you can shape it with a sanding block, and you can cut it with a scraper and a razor knife. So masking, I would say, is the first critical step. You have to bring your masking tape up to within a 30-second, maybe. Not a 30-second, probably like 3/32 of an inch, I would say, between a 16th and a 32nd. So you want to bring the masking tape just as close up to the edge of your miters where the glaze on the tile stops. All right, you guys probably know this, but a lot of tiles, the body of the tile is a slightly different color than the glazed surface. So, the more of that body that you've revealed when you've made the miters you can cover up with the color matched epoxy, the better it's going to look. Later in the video, I'll show you a spot where the miter, it rolled over a little bit too much onto the glaze, and so I was having a difficult time covering it up with the epoxy. So you mix it up, color match it, mask your tile real good, and then start filling it. And this is where I really started making my first mistake. I wasn't filling it up enough. And then I saw this little trick, some other guy using two spatulas like this, or putty knives like this, and cutting it in one step. And I'll say this, don't try this. This was a mistake. All right, it caused all kinds of chatter, which made all kinds of inconsistencies and pit marks. And this is where I realized, like, all right, this is going to be a process that I'm not good at, and it's going to be rough. But I had it kind of in the back of my mind that you could do multiple layers, if you will. You can layer epoxy, and if you're good at color matching it, then it's not that big of a deal. So the first thing I would say, the mistake that I made first of all, was not filling the epoxies up enough. You want like 110%, overfill them. That way when you go to shape them, you don't discover a bunch of low spots where there's just not enough material. All right, then the second thing I would say is don't leave too much excess epoxy on your blue tape and let it fire for too long, because when you go to peel the tape, if there's like see how it did that right there? If there's too much epoxy on the face of the tape and it's fired and it started to cure, then it just makes pulling that tape off kind of a mess. So you'll see that when I get over to the niche, when I'm pulling the tape off, it's just leaving little pieces of tape everywhere. So what I would say, if you're going to give this a try, is you fill it, overfill your outside miter with more material than you need, and then take a putty knife and cut it from, not cut it like I'm doing right here, but I'm saying like strike it one side at a time. All right, strike one side all the way up, and strike the other side, and then leave any of the excess. All right, you want to strike it kind of fast and kind of clean. You don't want to create more work for yourself, all right, by removing too much. So if you can envision these two tiles coming together, they don't come together at a complete 90, right? It's kind of around a radius. And ideally, you would like about a 16th of an inch rounded outside edge on that miter. And if from outside edge to outside edge on the miter before it's epoxied, you've got 3/32 of an inch, and you're trying to get a 16th inch outside miter, you've got all that space, that negative space that essentially you have to fill with epoxy material. All right, so the first critical step is really shaping this epoxy when you apply it. All right, you can do a lot with it afterwards with your knife and with your sanding blocks, but the better you can get it filled the first go around, just the easier your life's going to be. All right, it's not like I wasted all kinds of time because I had to do like 3 passes, 3 fills with more. I had to keep adding material to it. But you're introducing a little bit of risk in doing that because you have to be able to color match that epoxy each time you mix it, right? So you can, try and come up with a ratio that you use so that when you do it again, it's close. But the problem is, there's no recipe. You're just color matching it by, just with the visual cue. You're just looking at it and verifying it's the same. So you can remember approximately the ratios of color that you used, but literally each tile is going to be slightly, not each tile, but from job to job, there is no like preset ratio for the color you're trying to achieve. All right, you have to color match it by eyes. It's not like when you go into Sherwin-Williams and you tell them the color that you need. So the more times that you have to mix up a new batch of epoxy to fill in, little pits and potholes and stuff, the more risk there is that the color is going to be off. So when you're mixing it, you really just have to take your time and verify that your color is spot on. All right, so in a second here, I had to leave and go pick up some supplies, and you'll hear in my voice I'm a little bit worried at this point. Well, I had to go to Lowe's to get some sandpaper or some sanding blocks. I'm working on some outside miter epoxies. First time doing them, and I tell you what, it looks like garbage so far, but I'm not worried about that because it's first time. We're going to get these things dialed in here. I need to add more epoxy. One thing I've learned already is to overfill them, because when you cut it back, if they're not really overfilled, they just look really bad. So I'm not worried though. It's going to be beautiful. Stay tuned. So after I got back from Lowe's, I started putting a second lift on. And this is where I started to figure some of this out, that when I put the second lift on, I realized, all right, I'm gonna cut the excess off just one side at a time. I'm not gonna use the 2 knives. Because when I was peeling the tape the first go around, like I said earlier in the video, it just was looking pretty darn ugly. So at this point, I started to feel a little bit better about the process. And I'll say this, it doesn't really matter how good you are at tile work and all the other aspects of tile work. If you've never done this before, the first time you try it, it's going to be kind of rough. So you have to have patience through the process. And by the time you get to this second coat, you'll start to see it take shape, right? It starts to look like something a little more encouraging than after that first pass. At least for me, the first go around. I'm sure the next time that I do this, it will be more efficient, right? And I'm sure the first pass that I do, I'll take my time to overfill it to make sure that I cut it nice and clean. There's no excess, not too much excess or no low spots. So you see in those clips there, it just didn't look great. So I had to add more to it. The nice thing with this is I did find it bites, the epoxy will bite to itself really good. And that was clean there. So I added it, and then I just struck one side, struck the other side, and I'm feeling a lot better about the process now. So after you fill it and strike it and peel your tape, you can cut the excess off with a razor blade. But then where it really starts to take good shape is when you start to sand it with a sanding block, which you'll see here a little bit in the video. If there's one lesson that I could give people through watching this, it's just that, like I said already, the first time you try something, it's just rough. This is a humbling process for me because typically I know exactly what's going on in, the tile installation world. But this is like a whole nother aspect of the trade that I'm excited about doing this more going forward. I feel like I've discovered, I don't know, just another thing within the trade that I can really focus on and add to my arsenal, another tool to add to my arsenal just to I don't want to say separate my work, because I'm not, you know, out here really trying to be the best or whatever. I'm trying to be the best that I can be, but I don't care about separating myself from other people. That is what it is. I just want to do the best work that I can do. So I'm excited to have done this now, because now that the process is all done and I'm looking at them, it's clear. It's like plain as day, like, oh, this is a superior way of doing this. If you backtrack right there and look at me peeling that tape, that top left shelf, that's after 2 layers of epoxy and it still looks like garbage. So that spot there, I actually had to go back in and add more and do a 3rd pass and then hit it with a sanding block. And then it finally was looking acceptable and looking good. So, I mean, this is tedious. It's involved. I wouldn't say this is something that MITERS, for instance, aren't something that you do on every single job. They're involved, all right? You got to charge more money for them. And then if you're going to do MITERS and fill them with epoxy, you got to charge like even more, right? Because this stuff is time consuming, and the attention to detail that's required to make this look good with these epoxy miters, it's like an all or nothing thing. It's kind of that way with miters on tile in general. It's all or nothing. They either are really dialed and look really clean, or it's just a waste of your energy and it pretty much looks worse than it would have had you just used a metal trim or a bullnose. So here's some more audio commentary.
All right, here they are. Looking good. Took me 2 coats. First coat, I left a whole bunch of, I don't know, like pitted spots and spots that I damaged in trying to shape it. For instance, this spot right there. I'll have to fill that back in.
And now at this point, I mean, it's much more satisfying. You run your hand over those and they just feel so smooth. I mean, there's really not a more satisfying way to finish a miter off than doing it this way, at least in my opinion. When you start to sand it and it really starts to feather nice, I mean, it's just very satisfying. Alright, so I didn't show you guys yesterday on these miters. The nice thing about them, you take this sanding block and like right here, little imperfections. You just smooth them out real good. And the other thing is, if you can color match this epoxy nice and evenly, you can always add more to it. Like, see this little pinhole right here? I can mix up a little bit and add it to it. As long as you're good at color matching, you can fill that. Now with these miters, you got to be careful of this kind of stuff right here. If when you make the miter, you roll it over too far, then your edge, your point where the epoxy is going to meet the tile, is going to be the body of the tile rather than the glaze, right? So don't soften your miters too hard on or too much on the very outside edge there. Otherwise, you'll expose the body of that tile. And there's no good way to run epoxy over that, if you will, to essentially reglaze the top of the tile. So the miters have to be crisp when you make them before you can fill them with epoxy. And all this kind of stuff you can touch up. It all really comes down to how particular you want to be with it. But easy peasy to sand it though. Make it look good. Alright, so that's about that. Threw a little clip here of me at the end taking a walk with my kids. It was a beautiful evening. To recap, if you're going to give this a shot, the things I would say you really need to focus on are dial in the color matching, overfill the miters on your first pass. I had a new gimbal here, so I'm trying to figure out how it works, and you'll see the camera's going a little crazy. But anyways, overfill them, take your time, and go over all the little imperfections and just dial it in. Take your time, tune it, and make it look just as good as you want it to look. So thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and let me know what you guys think. I'm really curious if you've done these miters before and you have some advice for me how I can do a better job, then I am all ears to that.